Michelle, do we have paper copies of the,
I have
just the agenda?
I wonder if this will get us a lot more public participation. Can't hurt.
All right. It's so quiet. Need a louder gavel there. It is 7:01 and we are going to go ahead and call our Tuesday, September 7th, 2021 City Council meeting to order. We will start with our roll call.
Councilman Becker.
Here.
Councilman Hartwick. Here. Councilman Housley.
Here.
Councilman Johnson.
Here.
President Scheer.
Here. Right, we'll move on to agenda item 3, public hearings. This evening we have none. Agenda item 4, public comment. As a reminder, the city council will receive comments from city residents. Comments are generally limited to 3 minutes per individual. Anyone wishing to speak is required to sign up in advance or state the following items for the record when called upon: name, address, subject matter, and contact information. No action will be taken on any public comments unless the item is also elsewhere in the agenda. We do have some people signed up for public comment this evening, and we will start with Ann Engelman.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ann Engelman. I live at 428 Sherman Avenue East in Fort Atkinson. My phone number is 920-563-0416. I wanted to provide about 3 minutes of historical context. This is a courtesy regarding the poetry wall number 3. It will be on the north wall of the hometown pharmacy. It was funded entirely through private donations. It was supported by the Historical Preservation Commission and approved through the Planning Commission. It is 14 words. It is mergansers, fans on their heads, thoughts on things, fold, unfold above the riverbeds. When we think about making history, finding unique old dusty artifacts comes to mind. It is often curious to determine what the history will be that we are making right now. Here's the history of the current poetry walls in our city. Whether or not you enjoy poetry, poetry is part of our culture. There are events that call out for just the right words. Poet Lori Niedecker is a significant historical figure in our town that shines a light on where and how we live in our place, often with just the right words. In 2008, we experienced terrible floodwaters of the Rock River. The Friends of Lori Niedecker had been planning a poetry wall to invite our city to get to know Lorraine's poetry a place better. The stanza, fish, foul, flood, water lily, mud, my life, was certainly poignant for the time and the place. Flood and mud was being experienced by so many. Friends of Lori Niedecker asked, what 6 words describe your life? We have had a good time with that in our sidewalk chalk poetry and also recitations in the car while waiting for a stoplight to change. But it was not without its controversy. It was a wall, a mural of sorts, but it was not a picture. So why bother? The poetry wall, nevertheless, became a part of our city culture. In 2018, a second wall was painted. The Friends of Lori Niedecker wanted to introduce another stanza from the same poem that would invite readers to think about who they are in relation to their place. Poetry wall number 2 was across the street from wall number 1. It was bigger, and it was not that what everybody had gotten used to. It was more of a puzzle, and it required more time to sort it out. Many conversations ensued. Many outright disliked the wall, and others were just frustrated by it. Wall number 2 defied immediate understanding. For our city, there's nothing else quite like either of these. What do visitors into town remember after coming to our town? They remember it's that town with a wall, the walls that have words on it, and a catfish, both downtown. Both are artistic expressions. Enter 2021. A year after the pandemic, a politically divided time, we are all thinking about what? The Friends of Lori Niedecker is offering a poem that invites our city to think, thoughts on things above our riverbeds. This poetry number 3, the final wall, at least in my lifetime, will be similar to wall number 1. It will be a comforting invitation to think about what you think. So each poetry wall invites a question. Number 1 is, what 6 words describe your life? Number 2, who are you in your place? Number 3, what thoughts fold and unfold in your life? These walls are generating history right now, history that will be a part of the archives at the Horde Historical Museum. The Friends of Lori Niedecker shine a tender light, requesting consideration of who we are. Does history get any better than that? I think not. These are right now elements that will frame conversations and continue to do so. They have since 2008, 2018, and 2021. They are becoming a historic tradition. Will these walls create a precedent for future requests in our historic district? Maybe, but the standard as of these walls is very high. A historical figure, historical context, cultural awareness, significant layers that need ongoing exploration, regard for historic materials, regard for appearance, vetted artistic ability. These are just a few. And maybe some of these will be added to the zoning considerations. This project is the first proposal through the gates of the new requirements for the historical district requests. So I submit, painting this poetry wall in our downtown historic area on a currently painted wall will serve the interest of our history in our town. Thank you for your continued recognition of Lori Niedecker as a significant poet in our city. Respectfully, Ann Engelman. I don't think I can take any questions, and I don't know if you have time for them this evening. So you have my information. Also, this was published on the Fort Atkinson online in case you want to review it for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. All right, next we will have Aaron Ryan.
Hello, Aaron Ryan, 1210 Arndt Street, Fort Atkinson. Talking about Ryan Brothers. So my name is Aaron Ryan, second generation owner of Ryan Brothers Ambulance and Ryan Brothers Fort Atkinson. My father and his brother started the business in 1962. That's almost 60 years ago. Ryan Brothers and our employees have provided EMS services to the city of Fort Atkinson since 2001, 24/7, 365 for 20 years. That is 7,300 days, regardless of weather, pandemics, low reimbursement rates, or personal family losses. When I look around this room, I think I'm the only consistent person here for the past 20 years. We have been taxpayers in Fort Atkinson since 2001. I was raised by a man that instilled in me that your word is a direct reflection of your character. If you promise something, you do it, no matter how hard it is. You keep this promise regardless of a once in a lifetime pandemic where people are dying. And I am asking my staff to go out to the front lines and sacrifice their health and their families. In discussion with the chief on EMS and ambulance services, he assured me they would not be doing what they are today. I trusted his word and signed an MOU to reflect this in 2018. We have worked continually with the chief to do what is best for the citizens of Fort Atkinson. Before my father would consider selling me the business, he made it clear that our most important core value was to put patients and employees first. I earned my father's respect and the privilege of continuing his legacy, and this core value has remained unchanged. This last year has been the hardest of all 59 years in business. I lost my father, my brother, my business partner, and I had to lead our company of 125 employees through a once in a lifetime pandemic. The pandemic impact on EMS has been told in countless national news stories. Some ambulance companies closing, others incurring significant budget shortfalls. Ryan Brothers endured similar call volume losses while increased expenses to pay for PPE and COVID-related expenses. At the same time, we ethically knew we had promised our employees a career and a paycheck. We paid every full-time employee despite lower call volume, not because we were required to, because it was the right thing to do. I witnessed my employees put themselves on the front lines of a horrible situation because they cared about the community they served in and its citizens. Our employees made personal and family sacrifices and never asked for public recognition, even though they deserve it. Ryan Brothers transported 730 COVID cases for the city in 2020. Hopefully you can understand my disappointment when I was told late last week that the city was proposed to do what they were tonight. When I asked, did we provide great service? The answer is overwhelming yes. When I asked, is there any other EMS community with more cost and economical model, I was told no, and I have data to support this. While other EMS agencies are having staffing issues, I am asked, is Ryan Brothers? My answer is no. We are fortunate to have great employees. We are committed to pay them well and treat them with respect because they are the best at what they do. What has Ryan Brothers done a poor job of? We've done a terrible job of educating and informing the citizens and the city of all the things we have provided them in the past 20 years. I was raised by a man that told me to do the right thing and your actions will be recognized. If we were not over-servicing our contract agreement or not an active part of the community for the past 20 years, I could understand today's agenda. If we were overpriced and you could do this in a more economical fee with treating the citizens with the same level of service, I could understand today's agenda. I have asked myself, why am I so upset about the thought of not servicing this city? Because regardless of how we were treated, Ryan Brothers has always viewed ourselves as a partner, part of the community, and part of the good that come from providing people with safety through medical care and comfort, and honestly saving countless lives. It matters to us, even if it doesn't matter to you. I'm committed to continue our contract through 12/31 of 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Or Aaron, sorry. Next, we will have Cody Latson.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Latson. I've been a paramedic at Ryan Brothers here for the last 10 years. And I also serve as their current service director for the 911 operations. So the reason I'm here today, again, late last week, I was informed for the first time that this council would be looking to end our agreement to provide this community with 911 service after 19 years. To say that came as a shock to me is an understatement. After 19 years of dedicated service, to be given only a 3-day notice that you guys would be looking to end our partnership was not the news that I expected to have to deliver to my crews on a holiday weekend after what has probably been the most difficult years of their lives. I want to say first and foremost that I support the needs of the fire department in this town. I've worked with many of the firefighters for the past 10 years, and I count many of them among my personal friends. If there's a need if they need our community support, then I'm right there with them, ready to support them. But what I've had a hard time understanding is why that support has to be taken from the men and women who have provided EMS to this community for the last 19 years. Instead of working together to find a solution that supports all of our emergency service members, why is the first option we're looking to support the fire department to take that support and those jobs away from our emergency service providers that have already been here? I support and understand the city's leadership needs to evaluate options and look at solutions. I think this is something that all good leadership does. I invite the process and want it to be as transparent to the public as possible. What I want is for the public to be made aware of these decisions that are taking place, to be well informed and to have a voice in what happens. I feel strongly that inclusion should extend to everyone impacted by these decisions. Although Ryan Brothers' contract is with the city of Fort Atkinson, the hospital we service in town and the people we serve in the surrounding townships are no less important to us. While the city council has no obligation to notify a Fort hospital or a neighboring township about what it does, we feel there's a moral obligation to include them in a decision that could have such a profound impact on their communities. For the last 20 years, we've provided 2 full-time paramedic ambulances to this community of 18,000 people. Last year, payments totaled to us was $110,000. You do the math, that's $6.12 a person per year. It's probably the cheapest service at the highest level in the entire state of Wisconsin. So what I have to ask the council is why you'd consider choosing to cancel your existing reliable, longstanding service before evaluating your options and securing a replacement service. I'm concerned that there's a fear that a fire department cannot provide a better service at a better price to this community. They do not want to have to ask this community to choose between a Ryan Brothers ambulance or a fire department service. If Ryan Brothers is eliminated as an option, the community is going to feel that the choice becomes a fire department service or no service at all. And if this is truly the best option for this community, why the secrecy? Ryan Brothers has always been a team player, going above and beyond our contractual agreements to be a good partner to this community. When making an informed decision about what the best direction for EMS in this community looks like, why would that discussion not include the entity that has provided it for the past 20 years? I've met personally with the city manager and the chief on multiple occasions over the past year, and at no time during any of those meetings were any concerns shared with us. Did they ask for our input on this decision or describe a need to collaborate or look at different options? My request for this council is this. I'm asking you guys not to take any actions tonight. Leave all the options on the table and allow for an unbiased third-party assessment of the city's needs and how they can best be met. Let the people choose the best solution before taking action. Do not limit or eliminate options before there's an opportunity to present all of the narratives. I've made multiple attempts to reach out to the community leadership to provide information, establish communication, and work towards improvements. I'd be happy to provide this council with any information or answer any of the questions that they have tonight or ever. All I just need to do is be invited to the discussion and treated like a member of the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Finally, we have Todd Overdahl.
Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Overdahl, 620 Washington Street, Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, 920-988-2954. I've been an employee of Ryan Brothers Ambulance for 17 years. I'm also a resident of the city. I have always, and so do all of our employees, regard the 911 contract our bonus to working. It's not because of any other reason for the fact that we get to provide the 911 service down here. We take pride in it. We do it every day, 24/7. I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning picking up any one of your mothers that fell on the floor, to get her back into bed and go on my way. I'm the person that's out there doing this. This last year has been the worst year of my 25-year EMS career. I've gone through this before with another municipality where they think that if it's all in one department, it's the best for everybody, when you're already getting a great service. I want you guys to look at all the facts, not just the fact that it can be controlled by one entity. I don't want us to lose this, because for us, we take such pride that every one of us, our feet are on the line 24/7. We're there, we're ready to go. We're not off gallivanting, across the countryside, anything like that. We are on that line every day. We are as dedicated to this community as any person that's in that fire department or anywhere else. We are the ones that have to do this. We are the ones that have to deal with the aftermath of what we see, what we deal with. I carry such a load on my shoulders. It's unbearable at times. And you know why that is? Is because I take it personally every single call. I put myself out there every single time. Don't care what the call is, don't care what time it is, don't care what it is. I just ordered my meal at a restaurant. Oh, I'm out the door before I ever get it because the pager went off. That is my life. Just the same as the fire departments. I am doing the exact same job and I am providing it to you. Just because the name isn't Fort Atkinson on my paycheck doesn't mean that I don't have any less of a pride for this community, or any less of a desire to be here, or any less of a time that I just think it's not worth my time to show up to a call. The cost of an EMS service for 911 many times outweighs the return. Many times. It's the same in the fire service and all the emergency services. It's a losing battle of money. How much do you want to lose? You can try and recoup it this way and that, but in the end of the day, it's a losing battle. I've been in EMS long enough to know that 911 service does not pay. It does not cover the bills. It does not save a fire service. And I can tell you that if the fire service gets it, you still have to staff it. And that's going to be 24/7. And it's got to be a provided service at an agreed level, 24/7. So do you have the staff already? No. Do you have the staff upcoming? Possibly, but you're not going to know that. And these are things that have to be looked at. And I'm asking that you guys stave any action tonight so that everything can be presented to you fully and not just what's handed to you in a nice little packet. I'm available for anyone for questions, anything like that at any given time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. This is our first hybrid meeting, so we are still ironing out some of the required stuff, but we are required to do calls for anybody who's attending virtually. So this will be a first call for public comment. Please unmute yourself and then state your name, address, phone number for the record. So this is a first call for public comment. This is a second call for public comment. This is a third and final call for public comment. Seeing none, we will move along. On to agenda item 5. That is our consent agenda. Just a reminder that the consent agenda outlined within our agenda is presented for action by the city council. Items may be removed from the consent agenda on the request of any one council member. Items not removed may be adopted by one action without debate. Removed items may be taken up either immediately after the consent agenda or placed later in the agenda at the discretion of the council president.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion regarding these items? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Agenda item 6, petitions, requests, and communications. 6A, the presentation from Vanderwaal and Associates relating to the Banker Road Neighborhood Concept Plan.
So in April, the city contracted with Vanderwaal and Associates to create concept neighborhood plans for the city-owned property along Banker Road. Tonight, we have Brian Munson in person from Vanderwaal and Associates and Alona Bartnick, who is here virtually on our Zoom meeting to present the concept plans for the Banker Road parcels. Note that the Plan Commission did review this at their meeting on August 24th, and they did recommend approval of the concept plans as proposed in your packet tonight.
All right. Well, good evening. My name is Brian Munson. I'm a principal with Vanderwaal and Associates. Glad to be here tonight to really give an opportunity to present the outcome of the planning process for the Banker Road property, and then ask any questions that you might have, and just try to get as much information out there as we can. As Rebecca noted, we've been working with city staff over the course of the summer on really identifying opportunities to develop the property in support of the community's goals. And this is a kind of a unique opportunity for the community to kind of look at the site and understand how housing could be brought and developed onto the site that both responds to the characteristics of the site, as well as the market and community character around it. So when we look at a site like this, we really do start with kind of that first step out onto the site and really trying to understand what the site characteristics are. And in this case, there's a very strong divide. Banker Road itself, being a narrow rural cross section at this stage, has just a wonderful canopy effect that's present over the top of the road today. Handles probably more traffic than the width of the cross section could potentially bear in the future. And then the property itself has very different characteristics, whether you're on the west side of the road or the east side of the road. So when we develop a site, we step from kind of that regional context, and I'll see if I can advance. No, doesn't want to advance. If you could advance the next slide. So we can kind of see we take from the regional stage all the way down to the site and really help that site tell us what it can about the development potential for the site. And in this case, of course, the wooded characteristic of the eastern portion and the slope really drives the street grid and the outcomes much more than the east side. So there's some opportunities to vary both the type of housing that could be incorporated into the project, as well as the intensity of the housing that could be incorporated in the project. If you could jump to the next slide. Thank you. As you can see on the east side, there is a significant amount of slope. Previous tree surveys did identify a few of the oak trees, but we know that within that woods, there are many more oak trees that are potentially worthy of incorporating into the lots and preserving. There's the kind of kettle, which actually is a former mine where gravel was taken out of the site. So the dip in the road was man-made, but then they sent the road through anyhow. But nonetheless, an opportunity there. And then, of course, stormwater management is a given component of any development. And so we know roughly 8% of the site will be dedicated to make sure that that is treated appropriately before it leaves the site. Next slide, please. So the concepts. There are two concepts embedded within the final product. And you can see that, again, kind of going east to west, Banker Road becomes the divide down the middle. And since this is an opportunity where we're going to have to extend utilities into that road corridor and upgrade it to urban standards, widening it, really kind of, we see that as an opportunity potentially to realign it and preserve more of the existing trees on site, preserve that character of the overhead canopy on the road, but return it as a trail or part of a park space. So it continues to have a public presence and an opportunity for people to enjoy that, really unique wooded character, but move the new road to the west, where there's an opportunity then to develop a grid of compatible housing with different housing types embedded within what's kind of the flatter side of the site. So you can see a road grid on the west side running roughly north-south, offering opportunities to span from mid-size single family, some attached twin home products, some townhome multifamily product as we begin to get closer to the high school. The eastern side, the street grid is much more constrained by the topography. And so there's a common thread on the eastern side between both concepts, where you have, again, some opportunities for not necessarily larger lots to facilitate larger houses, but larger lots that could facilitate more tree preservation in concert with potential development into housing opportunities. And really the goal of the project, as I said, was to offer a variety of different housing types, different kinds and opportunities for people, regardless of where they are in their life cycle of housing need. Finding housing within the community continues to be a critical role within the community. And this site could deliver options that could be both entry level, move up, move down, rental and owner occupied housing, all knit together into the fabric of a cohesive neighborhood. If you could skip to the next slide. The final concept incorporated some opportunities to explore and have conversations with the development community about some additional single family formats. These would be served by a carriage lane or an alley, would be higher density detached single family product, but again, an opportunity to offer housing that doesn't exist within the community and broaden housing opportunities within the community. If you could go to the next slide, please. Of course, all of this is bound upon the character, not just the site, but the potential character of the product that would be built, the homes that would become part of this neighborhood. And you can see a variety of different examples here of ways that the architecture of the houses help knit that together so that you can mix. These are from all neighborhoods that we've worked on, have been built within the greater kind of central Wisconsin southern Wisconsin market, where the type of architecture can be designed such that you can have different types of single family homes, different price points of single family homes, interspersed with attached product and multifamily product in ways that create diverse neighborhoods with people of diverse backgrounds, but really continue to hold their value into the future. And the way to do that is to look at both the design of the neighborhood, but also the design of the architecture down the line. Next slide, please. And here you can see some examples of some of that attached product in ways that it can echo complementary forms with single family, residential architecture, amenities, and detailing so that you can mix all those pieces together. So that's a really fast summary of the effort that we've worked on these properties. We continue to have conversations with staff about ways to then move past the planning process and into implementation. Again, recognizing that's a unique opportunity for the community to develop housing in support of your goals and broaden housing opportunity within the community. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. I'd also note that Alona Barknett, who's been very influential in the design of the neighborhood, is joining us via remote, and she would be able to answer any design questions you might have.
I am curious from the two concepts, so the different breakdowns you have of the different types of housing that would be that's suggested in here. Are both of those taken directly from an assessment of what Fort's needs are and where those big housing shortages are, or is this more of a general suggestion of what the kind of breakdown or variation would be?
It's a little of both.
Okay.
Because the geography influences on the eastern side so much of what we can do. We know that given the topography in the woods, you wouldn't want to incorporate a lot of smaller lot single family over there. But it is reflective of kind of a balanced approach to housing with the idea that one type of housing doesn't serve everybody's needs. So we're looking for opportunities to incorporate different formats of housing. Now, in conversations as this moves forward, you could see the development community giving input that may shift that slightly in either direction based on input. But we wanted to make sure and illustrate the full spectrum of housing options because it is intended to be a guide so that as we go into an RFP process or recruit a development partner or development partners, you can talk to them about that spectrum of housing and the goal of supplying not just one lot size and one price point, but ways to incorporate all those different housing types into the context of the individual parcels. And then the final design is intended to be a little bit flexible. We know the street grid would be more of a strong recommendation, but the lot size and the configuration, a number of lots will flex a little bit as you move into that implementation stage.
Okay, thank you.
No questions, very thoroughly put together, and as always, we are eager to get started on this project. So we appreciate the time that has gone into this.
It's been our pleasure.
Brian, I guess one question that just came to me is assuming we do approve this evening, we move into the RFP process. Do we have like a timeline of what that'll look like in terms of getting proposals?
Well, we have shared a couple examples of RFPs we've issued through other communities. I think we've put Rebecca in contact with some additional communities that have done comparable work or are in the process of doing comparable work so that to get feedback and develop an understanding of kind of how to approach the RFP. It's hard to predict exactly what the response will be. I've worked with a lot of developers over the year and see there's a lot of opportunity here. It really becomes finding that right partner, which is kind of critical, so that the timeline could be issuing an RFP over the course of the coming half year-ish, give or take, depending on, timing and getting all of the work done to get the RFP out. And then working closely with those respondents to see which one will give you the best opportunity to develop the kind of housing that you need.
Okay, good, thank you.
So is the goal or hope that this would be through one single developer, or that this would be a partnership between multiple developers or two developers? I just know you
Yep.
don't often see developers that are apartment builders and also, $300,000 home builders.
Correct. And it may be that there's different approaches, and that's one of the conversations we'll need to have is how best to develop the RFP, because you could be searching for a master developer that is putting in the roads and selling lots to the people that will actually build the houses or build the apartments. There are groups that do build the full spectrum, both within the Milwaukee market and Madison market, and reaching out to them to understand whether there's interest and opportunity to attract kind of a larger scale developer that could facilitate that. But there also could be opportunities where there's partnerships, where there could be local developers that want to take on a block and would work with an apartment developer or some others to kind of bring the pieces to the table that can make it happen. And really that's kind of that next step, is trying to understand that the RFP appetite and see who's out there that we could begin the conversations with, and really try to strike that balance between understanding both that it's a larger property and that it may take multiple players, but there could be opportunities where a master developer could come in and do the entire project as well.
How have you seen that breakdown for similarly sized communities to this and other projects? you've done?
One, I guess a comparable community we've been working very closely with would be Wapaka, where they had a project that the city is actually in the process now of issuing the RFP. And we developed a master plan, guidance plan for them as well. And, their interest and hope is to get one party that would come in and build all the single family and then potentially sell some of the multifamily sites off to others. But there are groups that could be interested. And it's hard to say at this stage because every market's a little bit different, and really trying to understand what the interest from the development community is that next step. But, the goal again is to try to give them the roadmap as best we can and give them an understanding. So when they approach it, it's not how do they see developing their product? They've already been given a set of guidance that these plans will help them make decisions based off of an understanding of approximately how many units the community is looking for, the kind and style that the community is looking for, and then the idea of a range, that it shouldn't just be all one segment of the market or one lot size.
Great, thank you.
I understand that you must be helping us find a developer. Is that what I understand with you?
Yes, one of the conversations we've been having is about identifying potentially additional partners that, on a day-to-day basis, I work with a lot of developers. So a little bit different segment of the firm than was working on the comp plan. So we do these designs for developers on a regular basis. And so have some contacts and hopefully would be happy to share outreach and identify potential people that might be interested. But again, we want to make sure that it's an opportunity, not just for the region, but also locally, so that if there is interest, that people can express interest and really help develop that partnership in support of the project.
My perception is that it's hard to get a developer to come
Mhm.
to a smaller town like this versus going to Madison where there's better money to be made.
It is a challenge, and it's a function of risk and pace. Developers will approach a site with an understanding of how long it's going to take them to build through it, what the likelihood of success is, how many permits can be issued on a yearly basis. But there are ways to tip the scales. There are ways to have conversations with them that either help address one or the other through partnership. We've talked about whether there's opportunities for, you've got a unique situation where you own the land. So that gives you a place at the table that potentially could be advantageous to attracting development to the site. But again, not wanting to lose track of the goal, which was to develop a diversity of housing. We want to make sure that that conversation is balanced and that the community comes out as in a win-win situation. But it's a challenge. The market has changed drastically over the last year. Something we've seen in a lot of communities has been what was deemed, too far to drive is connected, right here via Zoom now. And we have seen a lot of communities that have been getting an influx of telecommuters because of the significant shift in employment in a lot of communities across the country where, people are looking for community and character and small town feel that have decided I've got a job. I'm not going to hop in the car and drive 2 hours anymore because I can log in and do the same job. That's opened up the opportunity for a lot of communities to kind of widen the net a little bit in terms of attracting both development interest, but also resident interest. And so hopefully, you know, again, there's some trends that have changed the marketplace significantly over the course of the last year. And that could be an opportunity that could lead some additional interest in the community.
Well, I know, I think we're all eager to get this moving, and you know, this is a lot of work was clearly put into this. So I'm going to make the motion to approve the Banker Road Neighborhood Concept Plan set as presented by Vanderwaal and Associates, and to direct city staff to prepare a request for proposal for distribution to qualified developers.
Second.
I
I think we both were.
Perfect. So we have a motion and a second for our agenda item 6B, which is the review and possible action relating to the Banker Road neighborhood concept. All of those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us on to 6C, the presentation relating to a proposal for additional staffing for fire, EMS service, and police services.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. So we've put together a proposal that we'd like to present some information. I've got a portion, and Chief Bump also will have a portion of the presentation. Right now, our fire department staffing, in my opinion, is at a critical point of not being sufficient to manage both the volume, the type, and the severity of the calls that we're recognizing. We are overstressing our volunteer staffing to the point that I'm afraid that there will be a significant failure in the system at some point. And the plan that we have been discussing over the last several months and are bringing to you this evening is related to my concern related to that area. The next slide, please. So we do have a critical need. We have had a significant increase in our call volume and the type of things that we're doing over the last several years. A little bit later, I'll show you a trend line graph that we've developed. But especially this year, we've had a terrible year for both the type of calls and the number of calls. We've had a number of fatalities, which is fairly unusual for our community. We've had some significant fire loss, both in the community and within our rural service area. We're stretching our volunteers to the point that it's affecting their jobs and their families. So that's the purpose of our process here. Next one, please. So the graph here shows where we're at for this year. Our staffing has not changed within the organizations since the 1970s. In the 1970s, a full-time position was actually eliminated. If you go back into the last time staffing was increased in the fire department, we believe it was in the 50s when the fire department was still located here behind City Hall, when the full-time people were employed. Our volunteers, our 41 paid on call volunteers are responding multiple times a day, sometimes for very extended periods. We keep hearing that they can't continue at the pace that they are. The thing that struck me is I'm hearing it from families as well. This year, we are on pace to run, as of what we did through the month of August. If the trend continues, we're on pace to run over 500 calls this year. That model is not sustainable with volunteer firefighters. There will be a problem. Next slide, please. So you can see where we've gone since 1974, when the last significant staffing change was made, from 174 calls. Last year, we were at 455. As I said, this year, we're on pace to run over 500. The pace that we're on right now is 537, but we had a significant number of calls with the DB Oaks property due to rekindles there. Matter of fact, we had another one yesterday. Almost a full month after the fire, we had another rekindle there. Next slide, please. This graph shows the trend line from 1977. I would like to point out there's 3 anomalous years on this slide. 2008, 2013, we're both above the trend line significantly. Those were the flood years. The floods created a lot of calls over a very condensed period. The other significant change is 2018. You notice that the trend line went down in 17 and 18 a bit. That happened because when I came here, I took a critical look at the type of calls that we were responding to. Chief Bump and I sat down, we had a discussion, and we elected to allow the police officers in the community to go and look and see if it was something that may be routine and we may not be needed for. And quite often the police department was able to handle some of those things without calling us. So some lift assists and some investigation calls, some motor vehicle accidents without injuries. We chose not to respond to those type of calls and allow the police officer to call us if needed. That did create a flattening for a couple of years. But then in 2019 and in 2020, we see that the trend line is continuing up again. It's very important that I point out that none of our response profiles have changed over the last several years since I made the changes that actually reduced calls. We are seeing a true increase in the number of calls. The thing that doesn't show in this trend line is the severity of the calls, especially this year. Many of these calls that we've been on have been multiple hour calls. And we're taking employees away from their jobs several times a day. In August, we had 2 days that we pulled people away from their jobs 8 times in the workday. In August, we had 2 days that we did not have calls. So far in September, we have 2 days that we've not had calls. So the numbers are pretty significant. And when you look at, even in August, we ran 59 calls. The previous record for calls when I came here was 40 calls in a month. And we've blown past that every month this year. We've been above 40 calls a month for every month of the year up until this point. So we hope that this is another one of those anomalous years and that this is not the new normal, but we are being asked to do more and more things. We've responded to more EMS calls. We've responded to more rescue calls. We've responded to significant fires, a lot of things that I tell people when I started in the fire service in 1980, unless there was smoke coming out of a building, the trucks never left the station. That's really not the case anymore. We sometimes go weeks or months at a time responding to calls every day, and most of them have nothing to do with fire. They have to do with all the other emergent type things that we deal with. Next slide, please. So as you heard from Ryan Brothers, the city's emergency services or EMS service has been provided by Ryan Brothers for quite a number of years. With the one dedicated ambulance and the second one being available when it's not being used on our facility. I did approach Ryan Brothers in 2017, shortly after I came here, about adding a third ambulance. They didn't feel that there was enough revenue to support that, so they would have looked for a increase in funding from the city in order to do that. That wasn't possible at that point, so we started the fundraiser, and you all know that ended up with 739, the ambulance that housed at the fire station, being purchased entirely with donated funds, including the training for the 21 EMTs that staffed it. So what's the situation today? We have myself plus 3 full-time people. The remaining members, or 41 members, are all paid on call volunteers. They respond either from their home or their full-time jobs when we need them. And as I said, that happens multiple times a day. One of the firefighters figured out the other day that we average a call every 16 hours for this entire year. That's a pretty significant number when you start looking at doing that with just the volunteers. So our mission's changed. I mentioned that. We do help Ryan Brothers. We have a very good working relationship with Ryan Brothers. When they need assistance, they certainly come and help us when we have significant fires. One of their units spent about 8 hours at the DB Oaks fire and actually ended up transporting our firefighter that was severely injured there, both to the hospital and I believe also on to Madison later. So this is not a by any way a degeneration of Ryan Brothers. This is about addressing a problem within the fire department and providing the staffing that we need to be able to provide an adequate level of public safety to the community. Next slide, please. So we currently have 41 firefighters, 17 of them are EMTs, 5 EMRs, emergency medical responders, 3 paramedics. Those paramedics are primarily employed by other full-time positions. That's why they have their paramedic license. We have 1 in Watertown, 1 in Janesville, and 1 that works for Jefferson EMS. We turn over about 5 to 7 people, and historically when we ask these people about why they are leaving the department, we have a few that leave because they're moving out of the community, but largely when we ask them why they're leaving, it's the stress of the continual training and especially the number of calls that we're asking them to respond to at this point. One of them told me that he had no choice. He needed to quit because if he didn't, he was going to be divorced. So we're seeing an increase. So if you look back at that trend line, you see an increase of call volume of about 9 to 12% a year. That tells me that this problem is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better for us. So we feel that there's a need to provide more career staff support to supplement our volunteers. We are by no means proposing to get rid of the volunteer contingent. I just got done talking with the firefighters about this prior to coming over here. And one of the things that I told them is this is still going to be a volunteer department. It's just going to be supported by a few volunteer or a few full-time members to handle some of the routine stuff that has to be done. There's still going to be, we're still going to be calling the volunteers out when we have those significant events. But a lot of those very routine events and EMS responses will be handled by our duty crew. When I came here, and I'm sure most of you have heard me say this before, when I came here in 2016, the first 6 months that I was here, I spent every afternoon going door to door with the businesses and the people that employ our firefighters and talking to them and making sure that they understood how important that volunteer contingent was and how important it was that the businesses support that continuation. One of the overriding things that I heard from those employers was we would love to let these people leave, but we don't have the depth of staff that we used to have. So that if an employee steps off the line at Jones Dairy Farm, there may have been somebody there to replace that firefighter for the time that they were gone. They just don't have that depth anymore. And many of the employers, including Space Savers and Jones Dairy and NASCO, all express that same sentiment that while they fully support the department and wanted to see the department be successful, they just couldn't provide the same level of accommodation that they had in the past. By and large, the employers in this community still support that volunteer contingent. Then we had the DB Oaks fire the other day. Virtually every one of our firefighters participated in that incident at some point. Some of them came a little bit later because they were working out of town. Some of them came the next day when we had crews working, but virtually every one of them participated. What's really important to note is that this is a quote that I've found a number of years ago. And it says, "We function largely upon the goodwill of the community, our community employers, and the goodwill of our volunteers and their families." That's the important part for me, is keeping that family support. Those of us that have been in the fire service for our entire lives, that family support is so critical. In my situation, my wife was a firefighter's daughter, so she understood what she was getting into when we got married, but she essentially raised our kids while I was at the firehouse. So Ryan Brothers does have one dedicated unit here. If you want to switch for me, please. Let's go one more. Okay. Ryan Brothers does have one dedicated ambulance plus 735 when it's available, not being used somewhere else. Okay. I mentioned that we staff an ambulance at the fire station. Prior to that happening, we needed to wait for another community to send an ambulance here. Generally, it was Jefferson if they could do that. But we have had a couple of calls over the years that they weren't available, and we had waited even longer. In one case, we waited 30 minutes for an ambulance, and we ended up transporting a person in actually the back seat of a squad car because we couldn't get an ambulance from any of the other surrounding communities. So that's when we put 739 in service. Slide, please. So our proposal is to add certified firefighter EMS personnel to handle 95% of the EMS response and about half of the fire-related calls. I mentioned earlier that a lot of those routine calls that duty crew would be able to handle. In order to fund those positions, our proposal is to bring 911 EMS service in-house to capture some revenue from that transport. As one of Ryan Brothers folks pointed out, it will never be a profit turning business, but it will help offset that revenue from EMS, will help offset the needed staffing in the fire station. If the referendum were to not pass, or you chose not to go to referendum, the problem with the fire response doesn't go away. The number of times that we're asking them to come and the 7 minutes that it takes to put a truck on the street with waiting for volunteers to come to the station, both of those things those issues are still going to remain. Assuming the role of the EMS transport enables us to capture revenue that will help offset that. Yes, we're hiring more people in order to do that, but the net offset is still greater than the cost, the additional cost. The reason for the referendum is that it will never show a true profit, a net zero, if you will. And it will improve our response time to both fire and EMS calls. EMS calls, Ryan Brothers has a phenomenal response time. They're always out of the station within a minute and a half. We will be able to match that response on the EMS side. We'll also be able to assume that same level of response on the fire side. So staffing 2 units, the one primary ambulance will be somewhat busier. The second unit, when it's not busy doing EMS transport, will actually be a 3-person engine company with the division chief that's also on duty. So both of those will be able to be responding. My plan is very specifically to hire 6 firefighter paramedics. A couple of those may be internal hires, but the majority of those will be hired from outside of the organization. And then 6 firefighter EMTs. We expect that those spots, most of those spots may be able to be filled with current paid on call members. And what's important about that is making sure that we hire local people so that they are available and that hopefully they will be more invested in the community and will remain here for a longer period of time. If I hire somebody from out of a school in Milwaukee area, they certainly will come here to get the experience. But as soon as a job opens up closer to home, they will go back and we will hire again. We're hiring local people who've already, many of these people that we would look at hiring as EMTAs have dedicated decades to this department and this community already. I think that there's a pretty good chance that they will remain for the long term. So there's about $500,000 in startup costs, including another ambulance and equipment to put into that ambulance. And there's some training. We specifically want to be able to train our current EMTs up to the EMTA level. We do have had some discussions about how we fund those startup costs without possibly including it in the levy request. Probably more discussion to go on that. as I said, in August, we had 59 calls. So I went through this morning and just did a really quick look at those 59 calls. And of those 59 calls, 30 of those calls would have been handled by the duty crew. There's probably another 5 to 10 calls that could have gone either way, depending on how it was dispatched, whether we would have called the volunteers or not. So there's a significant savings in paid on call wages that go along with this. I shouldn't say it's not a tremendously large amount, but there is some cost savings there. But the more important thing is it relieves some of that strain on the volunteer contingent, relieves the strain on the employers and hopefully on the families that support our firefighters. Well, a lot more discussion on as far as what the levy looks like, and all of those things will come as we move along through the process. And I think we're starting early enough that we have a lot of time to develop that additional information. Questions for me? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Bowman.
Chief, can I ask, I am just curious. So with the new hiring and with you saying that would most likely come outside of our community and not necessarily be on-call folks who would take those positions. And with you noting that that average turnover, you know, is 5 to 7 people a year, are you concerned? I mean, especially with how the last year and a half has been for people in a profession like yours, are you concerned at all about being able to fill those positions? And then do you have any
No.
concern that you would constantly be trying to refill
No,
those positions?
the advantage with municipal-based EMS is the benefit package tends to draw people and we will draw people away from the private EMS providers who are already trained. We certainly will be able to hire people that are just coming out of school if we go to that direction. The EMS services that are having trouble hiring are largely non-municipal. We don't feel it will have any problem filling those spots, especially since we're only filling probably 4 or 5 spots for paramedics. I really expect that nearly all, if not all, of the EMTA positions will be hired from current staff. Okay. And those people will not be additional to the 45 current roster that we have. They will be part of that 45-person roster because we'll also be cutting down the number of responses for the paid on call people. So we think that we can reduce that number slightly. And if we hire these people who are local, they will respond to those calls when they're off duty, just like our full-time division chiefs do now. At the DB Oaks Fire, only one of them was on duty. All of them were on that scene throughout the scene. Within the first 15 minutes, all 3 of them were there and stayed throughout the entire incident, as did I.
Chief, in one of the slides, you mentioned that a reason that sometimes the paid on calls leave is the complexity of the training requirements. And I know the mandates from the state and the training requirements from the state have only gotten more rigorous over the years. How much has that factored into what you're proposing today in terms of, I mean, is it going to be easier to function under those requirements going forward?
Actually, it does help a little bit because one of the things that we run into occasionally is we have a paid on call firefighter who works second shift. We actually have several of them. And one of them was just in today to talk to Mike Lawrence and I. Their employer does not want them to miss work for training in the evening any longer. Well, with a full-time crew, we will also be conducting fire training one day of the shift and EMS training the second day of each shift. And that training would also be open to those people who can't make the nighttime trainings. So it'll give them another opportunity to meet the training requirements that the state has put forward and the continuing education hours that are needed. So it'll give them that opportunity to meet that requirement without having to be there between 6:30 and 9:30 in the evening. So I think that part actually helps a little bit on that side as well. What we're looking at is 48-hour shifts. So 24 hours on the ambulance, 24 on the engine. And then the next day they flip-flop. So that the crew that was on the engine and the second ambulance actually becomes the primary ambulance crew the second day. So we think that spreads out the workload so that one crew is not running continuously for 48 hours. The other thing that we put into place is that if the primary ambulance crew has a particularly busy day, we may switch them at a 12-hour point instead of going the full 24. So to make sure that they're not overworked. That 48-hour shift will also help us hire people, because that's a very attractive shift when you work 2 days and you have 4 days off, or if you take 2 days off, you have 8 days in a row that you don't have to go to work. That really improved our morale and our work records when I implemented that when I first came here. When I arrived here, they were working 24 hours on and then 48 hours off. Some career departments work multiple tours where they work a day and they're off a day and they work a day and they're off a day, and they do that and then they get 4 days off. Those shifts to me would be significantly less attractive than the 48-96 shift that we're using here. So I think that will also be a help in hiring.
What kind of additional equipment are we looking at?
For the equipment for the second ambulance, we will upgrade our current ambulance to a power load cot, because that's a significant exposure for work comp, loading the stretchers all the time. Obviously, we need all of the equipment that goes in the second ambulance like we have in the first one. Lucas CPR devices, which is essentially a mechanical CPR machine. We'll need those for both units. In addition to that, there'll be some drugs and some other advanced care things that we don't carry on our ambulance currently. And there'll be some furnishings for the station that have not been purchased because we were going to wait until we actually needed some of that stuff, like more refrigeration and more beds and things like that. We've kind of put together a budget that shows all of that stuff together. I'm not sure it's 100% accurate. The new ambulance, we're looking at about 254,000. And we do actually have a quote on that, although we'll go out for an RFP when we actually do that. So I think that number may come down a bit from that. I don't imagine that ambulance dealer is giving us his best price just over the phone. So there are some costs involved, yes. And there is some training costs involved. And we've had some discussions with some outside agencies and organizations about helping fund that. So I think that there's some opportunities there.
Chief, do you see any advantages here to, and I know you mentioned this a little bit, but to our residents, so to the citizens here in the city? So obviously, based on what you've talked about, I mean, it's something that you say needs to change for your staffing and for those paid on call people. But can you just talk a little bit about too, kind of what the potential changes and impact for residents would be?
I think we do not have oversight of EMS rates at this point. The private service sets the rates. They notify the city what they are, but the city council does not have approval of those rates. Don't know whether they're excessive or not, but certainly I think that's something that the community should have a little more oversight on. Secondly, I'm also a strong proponent of community paramedicine, helping people stay in their homes longer. I know Ryan Brothers has a program, but I think that municipal-based EMS, not being profit-driven, is in a much better place to provide community paramedicine and assisting residents to stay in their homes. And I've always been a strong proponent of that, not taking people to the hospital just because we have to. So I think that's another thing that we could expand on through a municipal-based EMS system.
And on the fire side, they would obviously benefit greatly from the 90-second wheels out the door fire response.
Well, I didn't want to really get too far into the fire side, but I think that there could be a significant improvement in our ISO rating. We're currently in ISO class 3. A large part of the ISO class is based on response to incidents, both in time and quantity of people. I think improving our response time and possibly improving the number of people that respond to significant fires. Could certainly help us along with that. The other element is training hours is important for ISO. We certainly will increase training hours based on the opportunity of all of those full-time people getting 20 hours of training a month, and the paid on call people having another opportunity to attend training outside of the hours that we do now. It will help with equipment and station maintenance on the fire side. Taking care of the trucks and making sure that service is done to them and things. A large part of that is done by the Department of Public Works. But I think some of that could be done in-house if we had full-time staffing there to do that. Also, the potential to do equipment testing like ladder testing and hose testing and things like that. There may be an opportunity for that duty crew to do that. That is, again, I would really want to look at to see how busy they are before we commit to that. But there's a possibility to do some of that what we're now paying somebody to do contract maintenance. We may be able to bring some of that back in-house as well. Just taking care of the building. I mean, we've got a new building and it's a lot more square footage than we had before. And we're finding that it's somewhat of a challenge to find the people and the time to make sure it's cared for the way it should be. So all of those things I think could be improved through this plan.
Can you remind the council and the public what an ISO rating is?
ISO rating is the Insurance Services Office. They set the insurance rates for virtually every property that's insured in your community. Class 10 being no fire protection, class 1 being top shelf, the best that there is. When I came here, we were a class 4, about in the middle of the ring. We did a lot of improvement in documentation and equipment testing the first couple of years that I came here. We improved that to a class 3. We're about the midpoint of a class 3. I think we could improve that to a class 2 without a significant amount of work. The department that I worked in previously, we took that department from a class 7 to a class 2. It took 15 years to do it though. We are due for an inspection in 2023 or 2024 likely would be our next scheduled inspection. I can, however, request an inspection at any time that I think that there's been significant change in our capabilities. And certainly once we had this staffing plan in place, I may look at that and ask them to come and do an evaluation. To be fair, it will not make a significant difference in residential property because almost all the insurance companies charge the same rate from class 1 through class 4. We're already at that level. Where it will make a difference is on large commercial properties. Those commercial properties are rated primarily individually. So a class 2 could make a significant change in their insurance premium. When we took the department down at Monroe from a class 4 to a class 2, our ethanol plant, which happened to be just right across the street from the fire station, came and told me that saved them $4,800 a year in insurance. So there's some pretty important elements for those type of businesses and those type of occupancies. Smaller businesses and residential properties probably won't see a lot unless it's a large apartment building.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks, Judy.
thank you.
You've been Aaron, you've had your chance for public comment, and you can sign up for our next public council meeting and also have public comment at that time as well.
So if we look at the police department, continuing on this same conversation, the Fort Atkinson Police Department has 12 dedicated patrol officers that we utilize 24/7. So these are the officers in the patrol cars in full uniform that are responding to all the calls throughout the day. We're a 20-man department with 12 officers dedicated to patrol. So taking our calls for service and responding.
Well, I think a lot of people might be surprised when we talk about how we deploy our officers and find out that a population of around 12,400, that there's typically only 2 officers on per shift at a time. Sometimes we get lucky and we have a third, and those are our overlapping power shifts. However, those are not manned all the time because our primary is first, second, third shift. So anytime a first shifter, a second shifter, or a third shifter is on vacation, sick, at training, on leave of any sort, or away from work, we have to take those other resources, those overlapping resources, to put them on that primary shift. It is a mandatory 2 officer minimum, so we can never go below that. So when we talk about having officers on the road, it's pretty common that we have 2 dedicated patrol officers on at any point in time. Across Wisconsin and the United States, what they do is they identify the per capita, the amount of officers per 1,000 population. And through the census is where we get this data from. And then also through departments that provide that information, but it's usually updated with our census. So in the United States and in Wisconsin, they're both very close. It's about 2 per 1,000 officers in each community. So a community of 8,000 is typically, if they align with that average, is going to have about 16 officers for their police department. So if you were to use the state average numbers for Fort Atkinson, if we aligned with that, we'd have 27 police officers, and we have 20 police officers. You can go to the next slide, Andy. Since 2011, we have really struggled to have enough resources to really be out there and meet all of our obligations. The world continues to change. The expectations they place on law enforcement continues to change, and they keep adding on to what we do. We are always kind of seen as that 24/7 problem solver. People know that no matter what their question is or what their need is, there is someone that's going to answer the phone on the other line, and they're going to get them resources that can help them. And that is what law enforcement is in the United States, and it's what it is definitely in Fort Atkinson. People look to us to answer all of their questions and solve so many of the problems that they face because they know that we're there and able to help and willing to help. I don't see that trend really going away. We continually train our officers in new areas every year. In 1998, when I became a policeman, I never thought I would be a professional in crisis intervention. I never thought I'd be going and responding to severe mental health problems and trying to solve that problem. I didn't think I'd have to train officers so they knew the whole spectrum, from understanding and knowing how to respond to a child that's autistic, and then all the way up through the whole realm of knowing how to deal with people with dementia and everything in between. We live in a community that is known for having the highest per capita population of community-based residential facilities in the entire state of Wisconsin. And I guarantee you we could probably compete for the #1 in the entire Midwest. No other community has the amount of community-based residential facilities as Fort Atkinson. And we've seen that data, and we've compared that data over the last number of years. If you look at our calls for service, and this is a graph that goes from 1990 and then skips and shows you last year and current. So in 1990, we didn't quite reach 5,000 calls for service. If you look at 2020, last year, we're at 11,000, just almost 11,500. This year, I project we will probably reach 14,000, and it'll be the busiest year in the history of our police department. Currently, right now, or at the end of August, we were at 9,366. When I came into work this morning, we were around 9,700. So we are running a lot of calls every day, all day long. If you compare us from from last year to this year, we are already 2 months ahead. So we've already packed in an extra 2 months of officer work this year than we did last year, which if you look at it from a time perspective, we're fitting that much more work into the same time period, which is hard to do. We'll go back to the department, 20 officers, national average technically is 2.4 per thousand. And then the state average is 2.23. If you look at our average, it's 1.61. So we are currently, if you just look at the population, the per capita officers per thousand, we're at 1.61. And that's where, if we are elevated up to a state or national average, would be around that 27 or 27 and a half officers. That's an easy number to go by, but does it really paint the picture of what your community need is? Well, let's look at a city like Cedarburg. Cedarburg, typically top 5 safest communities in the state. They are right around the same population size as us, exact same department size as us, have a dispatch center that's full-time just like us. So they're very compared very well. But their 20 officers goes a lot farther because their calls of service are not as high as ours. A safer community, less calls for service, and not as strong of a demand on their officers. But then let's look at the way other side of that spectrum. Let's look at a community like Glendale, Wisconsin, suburb of Milwaukee, about 13,000 population, 48 sworn officers, because they're busy and they need those officers. So that's the, you know, you can't just use population and per capita, and I understand that, but it is a measurement that's worth looking at. So when I do those studies, and when I did that study, it got me thinking I need to look at another way to paint this picture, because we can't just look at it in one statistic. So Andy, if you can go forward. So we're handling about 11,500 on average this year, a lot busier. Some of the unique factors about Fort Atkinson and why we have more of a burden on our police service is, you know, we have a hospital. Some cities don't have the hospital. Hospitals, ERs demand a lot more law enforcement help. We have a large population of CBRFs, which we talked about, and we have a school district that is actually really large. It extends far beyond our city borders, and those kids all come to us during the day. That also brings in a lot of calls for service. So just some unique factors. But when we look at everything, I came across the rule of 60, and it's used in a lot of studies for public safety across the country, and definitely on the West Coast. And the rule of 60 says 2 things. It says first that 60% of your agency sworn department members should be focused on patrol. So we have 12 of our 20, exactly 60%. So we are right in there with that, okay? But then it also, the second part, which I thought was really significant and I thought was really pertinent that I tracked down the data for it, is that it says 60% of your officer's time should be dedicated for calls for service. So those are the calls that come in. People call in, they have a theft complaint, a criminal damage, they just need our help with something, a med call, a fire call. We go to all of those. Those would be our calls for service. Any crime in progress. But it also says that that 40% then should be dedicated to officers being proactive, not responsive. 40% of their time should be set aside for them to address community problems, going out and doing targeted patrols, doing traffic enforcement, community policing initiatives, all those other things that make a police department what it is, so it can provide the value it needs to the community. So when we look at that 60-40, what does that mean in Fort Atkinson terms or Fort Atkinson Police Department terms? So this is from our CAD or RMS system, direct data. Our dispatch center documents when an officer gets sent to a call, when they get to the call, how long they're at the call, and when they clear from the call. So using all of that data and running a query inside our system, I was able to bring that data right out, which was awesome. So this is all of our patrol officers. The first 3 columns is 2020, and then year to date 2021, so we can see. And if you look at our 60-40 split, our officers, where they should be close to 60, you can see a majority of our officers are well beyond that in their everyday work. So we have officers all the way up to 85% of their their time spent on calls for service, and only 15% dedicated to doing the extra things. So we look at the averages, we're about 75-76% over where we should be. And our dedicated time to doing the extra things is less than 25%. So when we look at a 60-40 and we're 75-25, you can really see that we don't have the time to do the extra important things that really help make this community better and safer. We're stuck in a rut, only addressing the calls that come in and as they come in, and our ability to be proactive is taken away from us because we're too busy being responsive. And that's what we're really trying to equal that out and get back to a point where we can be more proactive and not just reactive, because then we know that there's a benefit to that. And we see it across the nation, communities wanting more from their police department, wanting them to be more involved with the community. I've been here 7 years now, and those 7 years have always been focused on what can we do to provide more value to our community? What can we do to make sure people see us as the people we are and not a shadowy figure in a uniform in a squad car that drives by? I want everybody to know who our officers are, and we try really hard despite not having enough time to do it. So I think out of anything I can say today is this chart, I think, paints a more well-rounded picture of where our department is when it comes to not having enough staff to meet all the expectations that are on us. And I can't remember if there's one more slide. So when I look at things, I have this idea in my head that if I had 3 more officers, the world would be perfect. But I don't expect it to always be perfect, right? And I understand we have to kind of scale things back. 2 officers, adding 2 officers to our department would increase our rule of 60. We'd be at about 63% of our deployed resources would be in patrol, because we'd add 2 more to that. So we'd still be right in there, and it wouldn't be too out of balance. But we'd also be able to get more officers on the road every shift in an appropriate number, and have the amount of resources that would help us be more proactive and not just reactive, and be able to be more well-rounded in our approaches. I also don't want anybody to lose sight of the fact that, you know, we have this Banker Road development, hopefully a population increase, some more homes in the community. So let's not also lose sight of the fact that as that grows, our community grows, and our department needs to grow with it as well. And when that gets about 50%, we need to maybe bring in that 3rd officer and get to 23. But when I look at a needs assessment, 2 officers is really that need that we have before us right now, knowing that there's going to be more down the road as we grow as a community. And I'm open to any questions that you might have.
I'm just curious if there's any data from any other communities or similarly sized ones, how that 60-40 rule, like, do you start to see calls for service dropping because you are spending more time on those proactive activities? Is there anything kind of, or I guess more, do you have an expectation of that would drop, and if so, by how much?
It would definitely drop. So if you look at the amount of calls that each officer in the department handles, we're about, I think, 960 to 980 calls for service that each individual officer handles in a year, which is a significant amount of calls for service. But I don't have direct comparison on another agency and their specific numbers and how that might translate to changes we might make. When you look at departments that are very similar to us, but have the numbers that I wish we had, it would be an agency like Stoughton. Stoughton's very similar in size. They're fairly close to us, and they're around 22, 23 officers. But for the most part, a very similar agency, just with a couple more officers. So, and I think that they have more officers to deploy to the road. They work the exact same shifts as we do, a 6-3 rotation, 8-hour shifts. They couldn't be more similar to us, except for they have just 2 or 3 more officers than we do. So yeah, they have 23. I have actually right here. So they're 12,766 population, real close. They have 23 sworn officers, and their per capita is 1.8. Their officers per 1,000, 1.8.
And what does their call for service look like? Do you know?
I don't have that.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm, they are very similar to us, but they are also in Dane County, a little bit closer to Madison, so they could have a little bit more. I would see our calls for service increasing as well, though. If you had put 2 more officers on the road, that means that you have 2 more officers that are going to be working and being proactive when they're on their downtime, right? So, not all of our calls for service are calls that are responsive. The officers do have a little bit of downtime and they're trying to utilize that and be proactive when they can. That's why you see your officers out making traffic stops and doing some of those other things that we do in the community. I just wish we could do more of it.
Chief, one thing I know we've talked about before, and I guess I just kind of want to bring it up again for the benefit of the public, but I think your data would show, in my general sense, is that we're not a city that has a lot of violent crime. We're not dealing with that, but I do get a sense that in addition to the routine things, we have things like drug overdoses, people in mental health crisis, maybe some of our people in our CBRFs that need assistance. How is adding 2 more officers going to help us kind of get ahead of some of those problems?
Yeah, so very safe community. We consistently, since 2014, have been in the 50 safest cities in Wisconsin. We've kept that rating. We went from 49 in 2014, and we've gotten as low as in like 25, 26, which is really good. Safe community, good community. But yes, we have busy work and we have crime here that occurs. Adding 2 more officers into the mix, you would go from having 2 officers, maybe 3, to having 3 officers, mostly 4 working at a time. You can disperse them around the city in a better way. So the officers have a smaller area of responsibility and we can back each other up on the important calls, and then they can disperse out and be proactive when they have their downtime. Some of the things that really impact law enforcement is not necessarily the number of calls, but the time it takes to check all the boxes when you complete a call. So theft investigation takes time. You have to take the complaint, you have to document the evidence, you have to write a report, and then maybe try to go out and catch the bad guy. If you look at mental health situations, crisis intervention, a lot of resources go into doing those calls. And it's not the call, but it's the time of the call. We've had crisis intervention calls that require a mental health evaluation and a 72-hour hold at a medical facility. Those calls can take anywhere from 8 hours to 16 hours we've seen this year. So you have an officer that's been on for 5 of his 8 hour shift, goes to a call for a chapter 51, we call it, goes to the hospital, needs a medical clearance, might take 2 to 4 hours. Then we have to transport them to locations like Winnebago in Oshkosh, or a mental health facility in Green Bay or in Madison. So that all takes time. Now we have to drive them there. Then we have to come back. Then we have to do our paperwork. And before you know it, I have an officer that's working 13, 14-hour shift because he has to do all of those things and progress through that call. So lots of calls, but also lots of time to complete some calls. So if you can have more officers on the road, then the impact is better because you have more resources to pull from.
I know we've talked a lot about those, the chapter 51 calls before that can take up so much of one officer's time. Is that trend getting any better that you see, or do you see the state doing anything to help with that? Because like you said, that takes one officer away for an entire day or more.
It's definitely something that's that's there that everybody's talking about. The state has set aside money to build a hospital in Madison. It just opened in the last month, but it's servicing a large area. And I think it's only like 35 beds. 35 beds fill up fast when you have every community from, a tri-county or 4-county area trying to get a bed each night. Our county has a number of people that go under this protective placement each month. And that's why all of a sudden, before you know it, the closest bed is Green Bay. And so now I have an officer driving all the way to Green Bay, which is a significant travel during a shift. So I see people trying, we've met with the county health department, our mental health, we've met with the hospital, we've met with the state, all trying, how can we make it better? How can we make it quicker? How can we be more efficient? But there's just so many different things that need to work together and change a little bit too.
Understood.
Chief Up, do we have enough equipment to supply more officers? Have enough squads, enough that, or are we looking at bumping up the number of squads we have if we bump up the number of officers?
I think that it would be important for us to increase the fleet by one more vehicle. I don't see us having to immediately budget for another vehicle and bring in one, but just when we do our transition to hold on to one and not get rid of it and pass it on. So we try to keep our squads for in the patrol status marked for about 4 years, and then we move it on to administrative role that we pull the decals off it, and then I drive it. And then when I'm done with it, then people like Andy get to drive it when it's really old and tired. So I would keep it a little bit longer, and I would look to have 5 primary patrol cars. Not that we need all 5 of them at once, but if one breaks down, you got to have something else you can run into. And if you have 4 guys and you just have one left over, 5 would be a good number. So maybe like $5 to $7 grand extra that we might budget for if that comes, just to make sure they're all equipped the same.
I would assume that when we send an officer someplace and he has a wait time, like over a CVRF situation, that they don't walk there. So we need to have vehicles to be available for them to go.
Say that one more time. I think I missed.
Well, I mean, like when we have an issue with like a CVRF and your officers are spending an extra amount of time someplace with them, they didn't walk there. So we need to have enough squad cars here to facilitate the need when they're gone.
Definitely, yeah. So if we have an officer that's leaving to go to Green Bay and they're going to be gone for 6 hours, we may be calling in overtime officer. So they've got to have something there to jump into to work. So we maintain our coverage in the city. Does that hit what you were?
You won't have to talk hard to talk me into extra funding for the police. I think that's necessary.
I appreciate that. Any other questions? I'm always available, so if there's any clarification or if you see something later on, all you gotta do is ask.
All right, that will take us on to agenda item 7, resolutions and ordinances. 7A is the second reading of an ordinance to amend sections 2-52C and 15.10.13.2 and to create section 2-3 of the City of Fort Atkinson Municipal Code relating to allowing electronic participation at meetings by members of the city council, boards, commissions, and committees.
Okay, this is the second reading of this ordinance. It is due to the COVID-19 pandemic over the last 18 months. The city's transitioned from in-person council meetings and committee, commission, and board meetings to fully remote or virtual meetings. We've been using Zoom to do that, and now we're transitioning to this hybrid model that I hope is working reasonably well tonight. The city continues or desires to continue to support these virtual public meetings through the pandemic and in the future when appropriate for the city council, members of the boards, commissions, committees, staff members, and the general public. And we are offering that hybrid option as well. So this ordinance amends a few of our existing ordinances and adds some additional information to one of our other ordinances to allow the continuance of these virtual or hybrid meetings. The ordinance is not expected to impact the city financially. We have contracted with our IT providers to make the technology upgrades necessary to accommodate this. And staff does recommend that the city council perform the second reading tonight, which they have done, and direct staff to prepare it for the third reading on September 21st, 2021.
I I think this is a pretty straightforward one for all of us, and certainly knowing even when there isn't a medical or health reason that we can't meet in person, that sometimes virtual is easier and more convenient. So some of that may still go forward. So I would make the motion. I move to direct the city manager to prepare this ordinance for a third and final reading at the meeting on September 21st, 2021.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion relating to this item? All of those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Agenda item 8, reports of officers, boards, and committees. We will start with 8A, the city manager's report.
Thank you. So this meeting does represent the culmination of a lot of staff time, work and resources relating to the public safety proposal, as well as the Banker Road neighborhood planning efforts. So I just want to say how pleased I am to have these items presented to the council tonight, and I'm excited to see them move forward. We do continue to work on the 2022 budget and the 2022 to 2026 capital improvements program, including using our My Budget module in our financial software. We are meeting with the individual departments over the next 2 weeks with a draft of the budget and the CIP to be presented to the city council at the workshop on October 12th from 6 to 9 p.m. The 2022 budget is expected to be very tight due to our state imposed levy limits. The city's net new construction for 2020 was only 0.35%. So we are looking at a tight year. We've been interviewing for a few positions at City Hall. We've hired a new utility billing specialist who will start on September 13th, Emily Roth, who is already a member of our Fort family, as her spouse is a public works crew leader and volunteer firefighter. We've been working with our IT partners at Ignitec on the technology upgrades for the council chambers and transitioning to hybrid meetings. A couple other items that we will be doing over the next couple of weeks are removing the projector over on the side of the wall there and the lights, and installing another large TV, much like the TV that's on our cart there. So we hope that this meeting continues to be successful and it's used as a model for our other commission, committee, and board meetings. So I would ask people attending via Zoom, if there are issues for anyone that you want to make us aware of, as none of us here are on Zoom, please give us an email or a call tomorrow and let us know if what worked and what did not, and how we can accommodate you in the future. And that's all I have for my report.
Thank you. Agenda item 9, unfinished business. This evening we have none. Agenda item 10, new business. 10A, the review and possible action relating to a 1-lot certified survey map for the Badgerland After School Enrichment Project located at 520 Edward Street / 509 Clarence Street.
Yeah, thank you. This is a request to combine what is currently 2 lots into a single lot. There's a single residential home and then a large, what used to be a grocery store on the lot. The base organization has identified this area as one that they'd like to invest in and renovate the entire area to create a new campus and home for their after-school program. And one of the nice things in that process is to sort of tidy up the lot lines, and that's essentially what they're asking for here. This was reviewed by the Planning Commission and recommended to move along to City Council for final approval. I know we have some of the base organization folks on the Zoom call. If we had any questions for them, they'd be happy to answer them, and I would be happy to answer anything you might have as well.
Appears to be fairly straightforward.
We've talked about this a lot between various committees and the council level, and I think everybody's excited to continue seeing this move forward. So I'm going to make the motion to approve the 1-lot certified survey map for the base project located at 520 Edward Street and 509 Clarence Street.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion regarding this item? All of those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you.
That brings us on to agenda item 10B, the review and possible action relating to the Ryan Brothers Fort Atkinson LLC contract for provision of ambulance and emergency medical services.
The city of Fort Atkinson and Ryan Brothers, Fort Atkinson LLC have a contract stating that Ryan Brothers is to provide 911 ambulance service within the city limits. The current contract was entered into on January 1st, 2006, and renews annually unless either party elects not to extend the contract. The provision of that contract indicates that notice to prevent the automatic extension must be given between September 1st and November 30th of the year prior to the year in which the contract will terminate at year end. For example, if either party wants to terminate the contract on December 31st, 2022, notice must be provided to the other party between September 1 and November 30th of 2021. As you've heard tonight, the city is proposing to bring 911 ambulance service under the umbrella of the fire department. The city is proposing to hire 6 full-time firefighter paramedics and 6 full-time firefighter EMTs. That full-time staff will provide 24/7 coverage for both emergency fire and ambulance calls for service. Staff does intend to request that the city council review and approve a public safety referendum question to be on the April 5th, 2022 ballot in January of 22. The referendum question will ask voters to exceed the city's state-imposed levy limits to pay for the additional staffing for the fire department and to provide the full-time firefighter and EMS staff as described above, and 2 additional police patrol officers starting on 1/1/23. Okay. In addition to providing that paramedic level emergency response capabilities to the community, the proposal will bring 4 full-time cross-trained firefighters on site 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. The department's emergency response will still be supported by our volunteers for structure fires. If the referendum question is approved in April of 22 and the city hires the additional staff in the fire department, the contract with Ryan Brothers will no longer be needed. However, the contract requires notice between September 1 and November 30th of 2021 to terminate on December 31st, 2022. Therefore, this decision cannot wait until the results of the referendum question are known. If the referendum does fail, there will be time to pursue a new contract with Ryan Brothers or another private company and or review other options for 911 ambulance service in the community. Per the contract, the city will pay $112,000 for 911 ambulance and EMS service in 2022. Regardless of the decision on this agenda item, the city will continue to pay RBA under the current terms of the contract in 2022. There are significant financial impacts of providing full-time fire and EMS service. Those impacts will become more clear and will be communicated to the council and the public over the next several months. The staffing proposal will be more expensive than the current contract with Ryan Brothers, hence the need for a referendum to exceed our levy limits. However, note that there are significant revenues associated with the paramedic level EMS service that will assist in defraying the overall operating cost of the program. So at this time, staff does recommend that the city council provide official notice to prevent the automatic extension of the 911 ambulance service contract with Ryan Brothers Fort Atkinson LLC, which will end the existing contract for services on December 31st, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. Be happy to answer questions. Chief Roush is here as well.
So one of the questions I have, obviously, this is a bigger picture and a bigger conversation for our city than just EMS. Obviously, with both chiefs getting up, this is also talking about adding officers to our staffing capacity at the police force. This is addressing our on-call structure. So certainly for us here and other city leaders, the conversation is definitely bigger than solely EMS service. I guess one of my questions is, and maybe this doesn't even make any sense, but still fairly new to these conversations. Are we able to pursue the RFP as if, we would go forward with a referendum, but not make the decision to terminate the contract, at least yet, I say in quotes, because it looks like that time frame there's still some time available there. Is that an option, or is this, hey, we need to kind of make the decision, we're gonna go this route or this route, and we can't kind of do both right now? Does that make sense?
It
Okay.
does, it does. And the city council can pursue both options, but understand that if a decision is not made by November 30th, 2021, we will lose our window of possibility.
Yes,
To
absolutely.
provide that service.
Okay. So I guess maybe I could frame the question differently. Is there anything that benefits or brings any advantage to making the decision earlier in that time frame as opposed to later in that time frame?
I would suggest that what will change? We won't have an answer for the referendum question at that point. We won't have that until April of 22.
Yep.
We may not have even crafted the question that will go on the ballot. That needs to be done in January of 22 for the April of 22 ballot. So the council could certainly not take action on this item tonight. We would have to bring back any additional information that has not been answered tonight, if there is such, and then take action at another city council meeting.
I think it's unfortunate for everybody in this room and the city as a whole that we're put in this situation. The city manager just mentioned in her report that our net new construction rate this past year was 0.35%. That trend has been going on for a long time in Fort Atkinson. And for those who don't know, the state graciously allows us to raise our tax levy by 0% or net new construction. So that's why we're in this situation. This has been building for a long time. Our needs for our emergency services continue to grow. Unfortunately, the state of Wisconsin does not give us any options for doing so many things that we should be doing when it comes to police, fire, and EMS. And I guess it just points to there needs to be a change. There needs to be a change fundamentally in how we do things and how we operate our departments. And I think it's right now at the point where it's a tough choice and it's an unfortunate choice, but it's kind of like, do you want to rip the Band-Aid off very slowly, or do you rip it off and be done with it? And I think that's kind of the point that we're at, unfortunately.
I would agree. I want to emphasize that this is not a referendum on the service that has been provided by Ryan Brothers. This is a part of looking at something larger that addresses a larger need for our community. And it's unfortunate that it shakes out where we cannot have all of the current players. But at the end of the day, we really have to look at this as a public safety referendum and how it will affect our citizens. Not easy by any means, so. Guess I would look to my fellow council members if there's any other questions or comments, concerns.
We can't ask questions of guests, can we?
What was that?
We can't ask questions of guests. No.
Well, I don't relish this, but to put it out there and to make the motion, I'm going to make the motion that the city manager provide official notice to prevent automatic extension of the 911 ambulance service contract with Ryan Brothers Fort Atkinson LLC, which will end the existing contract for services December 31st, 2022, 11:59 p.m. Central Daylight Time.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any other questions or comments regarding this item?
Does this preclude the idea that in the referendum that we can't change the direction? And are we stuck on the path that we choose tonight? Or when the referendum comes, we are able to alter our course, correct?
You will be able to alter the course of the referendum throughout the next several months as far as, how much, what to include, what to ask the residents for. We'll get more information about how much a referendum for the proposed services will cost. So you will have plenty of opportunity in that respect. As I did mention before, if the referendum is not approved, then we would have time between April and December of 22 to renegotiate a contract or put out a request for proposals for any entity who would want to bid on that. However, if you do take action tonight, then the contract will not be renewed with Ryan Brothers as of 1/1/23, and we would have to determine another way to provide that service.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, this will be a roll call vote.
Councilman Becker,
Aye.
Councilman Hartwick,
I don't enjoy this vote, but I,
Councilman Housley,
So once we terminate with them, it's done, like, I'm still kind of there.
This particular contract would be done at the end of 22. It does not preclude us from renegotiating a contract if the situation changes.
Aye.
Councilman Johnson,
Aye.
President Scheer,
Aye. The motion carries unanimously. I believe that discussion will have to occur after this meeting. That takes us on to 10C, which is the review and possible action relating to a request for proposals for referendum consulting and communication services for a potential public safety referendum in April 22.
So as I've mentioned tonight, the city does not have the levy capacity needed to fund the public safety and staffing proposal under the current levy limits. So the city is recommending, city staff is recommending that the council ask our residents to pay additional property taxes for the additional service on that through a referendum question on the ballot on April 5th, 2022. The process for the referendum will require significant outreach and education efforts within the community. Staff would like to distribute a request for proposals to find and potentially select an experienced communication consultant to ensure that the messaging and information sharing with the public is done professionally, resulting in a well-informed electorate and before the election. So attached to this memo in your packet tonight, you have a request for proposals and a proposal evaluation form for the council's review. Staff did develop this request for proposal using samples from other municipalities with information and deliverables specific to the city of Fort Atkinson. If the council authorizes staff to move forward with the RFP, we would intend to do so by the end of this week. We have identified qualified consulting firms, as well as intend to post the request for proposals on the League of Municipalities website. There is a tentative timeline in the memo on page 2, starting with this meeting tonight and moving forward through April of 22. The city does not have funds budgeted for the referendum consulting services. However, there are several funding sources available to pay for the consultant, including the American Recovery Plan Act funds in the revenue replacement category, as well as fundraising, donations, and possible community grants. Staff does intend to have more information about funding for the council to consider at the meeting on October 19th, when the costs for such services have been identified. Staff does recommend that the city council review the attached request for proposals and evaluation and authorize the city manager to distribute the documents to known communication consultants and through the League of Wisconsin Municipalities Classified Ads website.
Rebecca, can I ask, there's a section in here that talks about that the proposed services should be formatted to basically give a not to exceed lump sum amount. Will that also include a full breakdown of how they reached that lump sum amount? In terms of, you know, X amount is for this service, et cetera, kind of going through that list?
Yes, let me just get to that section.
So I guess just one of my concerns, I think, from a citizen perspective, sometimes when you hear the consultant word thrown out there, it can be a little, okay, we're spending money on this to try to raise money for this or get more money for this. And I know, you know, certainly with an issue like this, you know, having options of putting a community cohort together and getting kind of more of our community much more involved in that outreach, that I just think it would be important to kind of have the option to pick and choose what we would maybe want a consultant to do that wouldn't be something that staff or a community group could effectively do, and then maybe not be paying for consulting services when that is something that we could use community volunteers or community leaders to do.
Sure, there's a couple questions there in there, I think.
Sorry.
And then, just to answer your first question, the RFP does also request hourly rates and anticipated time and materials needed. And then also, we did include an optional survey. So that is something that we could review the cost provided by a consultant and determine if that is appropriate to be done by a consultant or if a community group could take that on. And then there is another aspect of this where the city, where we're requesting any other scope or tasks that the consultant who has more experience in this than we do would be able to provide with a cost on that as well. So then the council could choose, you know, which items they feel are appropriate and necessary to move forward. I will say that one of the benefits of having a consultant at least develop the overall strategy is that it is cohesive, and that even if parts can be taken on by certain groups, it's important to have the overall strategy completed by a single individual or group.
I just think, you know, this is, we're kind of joining a trend that's kind of building in this state. I think it's kind of like, people are kind of gotten used to school district referendums. I think unfortunately, emergency services referendums are going to become more of the norm in our state. But I think the proposal, the RFP, I should say, the request for proposal that's laid out, it makes sense. I think it's a reasonable scope. I think it's something we probably need to move forward with sooner than later.
Any other questions, comments?
Just looking at the timeline, the deadline, so when we would be reviewing things, would there be more thorough information about what funds would be used and how services used through that would be paid for or covered through the city?
Correct.
Okay.
Once we have an idea of what the what the costs we're looking at, we will be able to provide options for funding.
I then would move to authorize the city manager to distribute the requests for proposals for referendum consulting and communication services to experienced communications consultants and through the League of Wisconsin Municipalities website.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further questions, discussion? Seeing none, all of those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Takes us on to agenda item 11, miscellaneous. This evening, we have none. Agenda item 12, claims, appropriations, and contract payments. 12A, the review and possible action relating to the verified claims presented by the Director of Finance and authorization of payment.
Move to approve the list of verified claims presented by the Director of Finance and to authorize payment.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. This will be a roll call vote.
Councilman Becker,
Aye.
Councilman Hartwick,
Aye.
Councilman Housley, Councilman Johnson,
Aye.
President Scheer.
Aye. Motion carries. Agenda item 13, the city council may consider a motion to convene in closed session pursuant to state statute 19.851C to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the government body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, specifically the 6-month review of the city manager. And we will not adjourn into open session.
I make the motion to move into closed session pursuant to state statute 19.851C to consider performance review of the city manager.
Second.
A motion and a second. This will be a roll call vote.
Councilman Becker,
Aye.
Councilman Hartwick.
Aye.
Councilman Housley, Councilman Johnson,
Aye.
President Scheer.
Aye. Motion carries. At this time, everybody will leave the chambers, and then anybody online, we will be ending the online portion of the meeting.
Yeah.